Hi, let's do a November wrap up. Hi, I'm Colleen Delaney. I talk about books and writing. In the description, I always have links to my newsletter, and let's just talk about wrapping up November. I released a book in November, Bewitching Rosemary. It's the second book in the Witches of Star Island, and I love it. So let's talk about November. November was an interesting month. It was supposed to be a writing heavy month, but it just wasn't happening for me mentally. I switched projects halfway through, which is fine, and I'm glad I did because I was more in a headspace to work on something else. But I only ended up writing close to 12,000 words, and I usually try to write 50. So I ended up reading way more than I usually do. Usually in November, I read maybe 4 or 5 books. I read 7, and they were wildly different. So let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to review them in the order in which I read them rather than splitting them up into genres because it was a pretty wild spread. First, I read Blackbird House by Alice Hoffman, which I usually have a physical copy of, but I read it for my book club and I lent it to one of my friends in the book club, and she hasn't returned it yet. I did give it to her and say, you need to give this to me back. You need to give this back to me. And she said she would, and I believe her. I honestly don't think she's done with it. We ended up having to cancel our meeting, and I don't know if we're ever going to talk about it. But Blackbird House, it was a reread for me. It was my month to choose the book. We started reading in October, so everybody asked for something somewhat witchy, but not Halloween-y, and so I thought that was a good pick. It is a magical realism story that follows a piece of land for 200 years. So you see who lives in the land, who lives on this piece of land. And it's one of those Alice Hoffman books where she can take 20 pages and make you fall in love with the character. She's the queen of that. And it was honestly wonderful. It was a 5-star read, which I knew it was going to be because it was the first time. Moving on to something I actually read for the first time, I read Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lenz. This was obviously a book of the month pick. This is a memoir written by Bethany Joy Lenz, who you probably recognize from One Tree Hill if you are a One Tree Hill fan. And it is about her time getting sort of wrapped up into a cult while she was also on One Tree Hill. It starts before that. You learn about her childhood briefly, and then before she has landed One Tree Hill, she was on a lot of soap operas and stuff, and what it was like being a child actor. And then you follow her dealings with the cult and her relationships post the cult, because she did marry someone in that cult and have a child with him. She is no longer married to that person. It was an interesting read. I didn't fly through it. She talks about how she's in a cult that no one's heard of. There was nothing crazy going on with like kidnapping or anything like that. They did really try to separate people from their families. But overall, I thought it was a medium-paced memoir. I have to say I preferred Grimoire Girl, which is the book that Hilary Burton wrote. What's her married name? Hilary Burton Morgan wrote. That's more about like witchy stuff, which if you know me, I liked a memoir about being a witch more than being in a cult, obviously, but I still enjoyed it. Next, I read an arc, which I've had for a very long time, and it was The Highlander's Return by Lindsay Sands. This is the newest book in the Highland Bride series. If you've been following around, I've been reading that series completely out of order. So this was literally book 12, and I've read like 5 of them so far, and most in the first half of the series. Like, I think 7 is the furthest I've read otherwise. I didn't really know the outside characters at this point. We've kind of moved away from the people I did know, but you still have that wonderful, bonkers medieval setting with Lindsay Sands where people continually get head injuries and shot with arrows and somehow survive and have like crazy good sex after being shot with a medieval arrow like 10 days later, which seems unlikely. But they're so much fun. So in this one we have Graham, and he's come home because his brother has died, and his brother was like the laird or whatever. And he meets his brother's widow, who's very shy, but has been like running the clan like since her husband disappeared, even before he died, because he literally on their wedding night was like, "What's up? See ya." And then effed off to the Holy Land, with his mistress. So it has a great Highland Brides Lindsay Sands setup, and these are just so fun. Like, I read this in like 2 days probably, flew through it, had a blast. What can I say? If you like murder, intrigue, crazy explicit sex, not like really crazy, but like explicit sex scenes, Highland times. It's a lot of fun, okay? The series is a lot of fun. I'm gonna get myself like at least 2 for Christmas. Now let's switch gears entirely. And actually, I shouldn't say switch gears entirely because we are staying in the Middle Ages. We're going earlier though. And I read The Life of Charlemagne by Einhard, which is a medieval biography of Charlemagne that was written, I think, in 1850-ish. Not 1808. All these are 8s. Oh, it was written between 1817 and 1836, but most likely between 1817 and 1830. Einhard is the nephew of Charlemagne and lived at court with him. And this book was a very enjoyable, fast biography of an emperor. It's not a secret anymore. I'm reading this as research for a possible future project I might be working on. And I'm so glad I read this because it was such a good introduction without like bogging me down at all. It gave me some great outlines of all the wars this emperor was involved in, which is so many, and also some insight into his personal life because it was written by his nephew. So you get cool things like when he ate lunch, he liked someone to read out loud to him. Vibes, I get it. Very relatable manic pixie dream emperor. I did feel a little bit, and I tweeted this if you follow me on Twitter, or I blue skied it. I can't remember that I did feel like he was a manic pixie dream emperor because there were things like he likes to eat lunch while someone reads to him. And then he takes off all his clothes and takes a naked nap. I was here for it. All right, so next I read Shelterwood by Lisa Wingate, which is a historical fiction novel told in 2 parts. One is in 1908, I think, or 1910, and the other is 1990. In the past, we are with a girl named Olive who is escaping her evil stepfather with her foster sister, and they are kind of on the run to nowhere. They're just sort of looking for her foster sister's older sister, trying to get away from their stepfather, or the girl's stepfather, the other girl's foster father. The 1990 plotline is about a park ranger named Val who stumbles upon 3 skeletons in the woods in the national park, and is trying to investigate where they might have come from without ruffling feathers of this new area she's living in as an outsider and as a park ranger, which the majority of the people who live there do not like the park rangers. So this book wasn't really for me. It was a little bit too slow paced about a time period I wasn't that interested in. The reviews online are very mixed. Some people are very positive that they loved it, that they were so interested in the time period, and some people had a similar feel to me that the pacing was a little too slow to keep me engaged. After that, I decided to reward myself with The Virgin and the Rogue by Sophie Jordan, which is the 6th book in the Rogue Files and my last book in the Rogue Files. So I like to read Sophie Jordan's backlist, all out of order, as sort of comfort reads, and I finally finished this series. Don't worry, there are more for me to start, and I have one on my December TBR if you already watched that. This is about Charlotte, who's kind of the boring Langley sister. She is going to marry her childhood sweetheart, who she's just kind of this guy she's had a crush on since she was a kid. Her sister got married to a duke in the last book, and she, though, has very, very bad premenstrual cramps, like awful. And so her sister Nora, who's the 7th book is about, that's the first book I read in the series. She is trying to, she's like an herbalist, and she's trying to make some sort of concoction that will make her sister feel better. And so she gives her this new one at the beginning of the book, and she passes out, but then she wakes up literally in a lust frenzy. So it's more of an aphrodisiac than actually a painkiller. And she is losing her mind and is running through the hallway trying to get to her sister to be I think I'm dying, when she comes upon Kingsley, when she comes upon Kingston, who is the Duke's stepbrother. So her sister's husband's stepbrother, who's just hanging out at the house, and she basically attacks him, but it's very consensual. And they hook up, they don't sleep together, and then she's horrified and gets out of there. Kingston had thought she was like really meek and pretty boring during dinner. And he has recently, in the last year, decided to give up all like sexual encounters. He was a rake, and then he found out who his mother was. He's like a bastard son of an earl. And she was a prostitute. And when he went to see her, she was dying of syphilis. And it sort of made him rethink his ways and how he was behaving. I liked that a lot because that's so rarely discussed in Regency times. It's like these rakes never have any sexually transmitted diseases, which is almost impossible given the time period. And so I liked that. Obviously he didn't actually have syphilis, but he was like scared straight sort of from syphilis, from seeing his mother with syphilis. This is just a lovely, comforting, it's so fun to be back in Sophie Jordan's world read that I supremely enjoyed. I also discussed this in my December TBR video. And if you haven't seen that, I'm going to put more Regency and medieval romances on my TBRs because I've been missing that sort of like fly through it, comforting, this feels happy feeling that I used to get when I read only romance. And lastly this month, I read The Stone Witch of Florence by Anna Rash. This is a historical fiction, fantasy adjacent. I don't know if I would, you should probably call it historical fantasy, to be honest, when you really think about it. It's presented in such a way that it feels like it could be the real world, but there is quite a bit of magic in it. So we're in two time periods here. We're in 1330 and we're in 1348, and we're in Florence and Genoa, and it is the plague. So 1348 is when the plague is. 1330, there is no plague. We start the book in 1348, and this young boy finds Minerva in Genoa and is basically like, here's a letter from the man you were in love with a long time ago. And you need to come back to Florence because everyone is dying and the relics that have been protecting us are going missing. And she goes. So then you go back to 1330 and you jump between the two. You jump between her learning how to be a stone witch and living in this convent and seeing that she has this innate power to take stones and make them do different things. So like some stones can cure the plague. Some stones can turn a baby the right way in the womb. So it's survives birth. And then in 1348, you follow her coming back to Florence, where she's been exiled from, and trying to figure out who is stealing all these relics that is making the people believe that's why the plague is coming, because they're holy saint. I'm sorry, I'm just saying relics like everybody had a Catholic education like me. Relics are pieces of saints' bodies or possessions of saints. But in this, it is mostly pieces of saints' bodies. And there's a heavy tradition in Catholicism to have a relic at every church. I don't know if this is still the case, but one of the last times I went to church at my parish I grew up at, our new pastor said that there was a relic in the altar and that he had looked at it, and it was a very, very odd homily, and I didn't 100% believe him. But supposedly there are a lot of relics in Catholic churches. Stop going off on your Catholicism tangent. This ended up being a little bit more of a mystery than I thought it was going to be. I was picturing more like medieval witch healing people from the plague and trying not to get burned alive for doing so, which there is a lot of that in here. But there's a huge like medieval mystery in the 1348 times, which was enjoyable. I just liked the healing people of the plague, midwifery, stone magic stuff more than the mystery, but I still really enjoyed the book. That's everything I read in November, which is very exciting. So I read 7 books in November and I ran the gamut. I mean, I had a 5-star read with Blackbird House. I would say I had several 4.5-star reads, a lot of fun and interesting books. And if you're someone who follows me for writing and you're wondering what I wrote in November, I wrote 6,000 words in The Wolves of Leuven book 7, and I wrote 6,000 words in The Witches of Star Island book 5. And I have decided to stick with finishing The Witches of Star Island book 5, even though it's coming out after The Wolves of Leuven book 7. I'm more just in that vibe currently. And that's all I'll say about that. So if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching for so long. What did you read in November? Did you read any of these books? Did anybody else read The Life of Charlemagne? If you did, or if you've ever read this, for the love of God, tell me, because that's crazy. If you didn't read The Life of Charlemagne but read any of these other books, also tell me if you read them and tell me what you thought of them. And let me know what your favorite book was in December. Let me know what your favorite book was in November. If you don't want to write words, but you want to let me know that you made it to the end of the video, I will take a fall leaf emoji, because I'm not going to ask you for any more fall leaf emojis until next September, probably, maybe August. And as always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I'll see you soon.